The theme tonight is about health. More than 85% of Canadians use a car to get to work, a fact that comes with significant repercussions, not just for the environment, but also for the healthcare sector as well. That's because inactive commuting, along with inactive lifestyles, contributes to a whole host of physical ailments, from obesity to heart disease. Here in Toronto, we have the statistics are a little bit more favorable. Here, it's about 70% take the car, a little bit more. About 20% take transit. Adam, remember that from your days? 25. About 25%, and then you have 3, 4, 5% depending on the weather, taking their bikes or walking. So we're a little bit better in this city. I think Edmonton is the worst Canadian city in terms of public transportation. I think it's less than 20%. I think it's around 18% take it, where 82% drive. So we're ahead of some of the other cities in Canada, but not nearly as close as we are to other international cities. So that tonight we're going to hear from two charrette teams that sought to answer this following question: how can we make active transportation a viable alternative to our communities? So I'm going to introduce them to you now, or our panel now. So first up is Paul Bedford. Paul, right there, is the adjunct professor of city planning at U of T and Ryerson. Adam Giambrone he's a special advisor to the president of the Metropolitan Transportation Agency in Montreal and president of the Toronto chapter of Certified Institute of Logistics and Transport. He's also the former chair of the TTC and former city councillor. Jennifer Keesmaat is the chief planner for the city of Toronto for all of 48 hours now, is that what it is?
Not quite.
No, okay, so not even there yet. So we can't blame her for anything yet. We're not blame her for anything. And Nancy Smith-Lee is here with us. She's the director of the Toronto Centre for Active Transportation, also known as TCAT. So the first presentation is from Low Carb Diet, and it will be Connor Malloy and Todd Smith. Connor is the operations manager for Greening Homes Limited, and Todd is a landscape architect at IBI in Toronto. So it's up to you guys.
Good evening. Thanks for coming. I'm Connor Malloy. This is Todd. Tonight we're going to be talking about our challenge, which is low carb diet. It's to bring active transportation to market. Not bring it to, but how do we encourage more of it to create healthy lifestyles? So as a group, we started with a 3-day presentation. Sorry, 1-day presentation and a 3-day charrette. We came up with the ideas you see tonight. And Todd and I, in a small group, worked for a few months to create the exhibit, which you might see. So what we started with was our challenge to create healthy lifestyles through active transportation in the market. Hence the low carb diet. So you might ask, why Markham? It's prime candidate for thinking about active transportation. It was once thought, at least by me and maybe others, as a bit of a bedroom community, but it's now a full-fledged city with a large population of 300,000 people, and it's one of Canada's fastest growing cities. So the current population is 300,000 people, and as the fastest growing city, by 2040 it's expected to grow by 150,000 people and 100,000 jobs. Now presently, roads are already congested during peak times. That starts as early now as 6 and finishes late as 9 for people doing sort of flex hour programs. I think it started as early as 3:30 and end at 6. So really you're only creating a small window in the middle of the day that isn't congested, especially as it fixes Old Markham with Highway 7, 401, and 148. And the big number to think about is 180,000. Every day in Markham, 180,000 trips are made within the city that could be walked or biked. So those are trips that are less than half an hour. The majority of those are 50 minutes, and they could be 1 or 2 kilometers away. But based on the current mindset and the instruction of the city, you are the easiest and the most typical choice to make is to drive. So the current mode share is single drivers represent 62% of the modes, of the trips made within the city and out of the city. 50% of those are driven by 2 people or more. 8% take transit, 8% walk, and 3% take the go, and 4% is other. So much lower than Toronto. And when you you think about Markham being a commuter city leaving for Toronto, 3% is a very small number for those who actually take a GO service into the city. But with GO, although you're taking a sort of a green measure downtown, it's really that last mile, where if you look at those users at most stations, in Markham, this is Mount Joy, 81% live less than 3 kilometers away, and actually more than half of that live within 1 kilometer away. But 2/3 of those people drive to the station and park there. And the other metric for determining how active the population is how their kids act and get around. So in 1986, 53% of kids walked to school, and now that has dropped to 36. And that's not to say that the population is so large that kids are walking long distances. Most of these cul-de-sacs are built around schools for the purpose of getting kids to school safe. So again, how do we encourage active transportation? The solution is not as simple as adding bike lanes. It's something that I know people think about. They just say, we'll just add bike lanes and make wider sidewalks, but it's a combination of public consultation, its policies, programs, and its planning. So what we require, and Markham requires, is a rigorous transportation redesign. And what we could take from that is really looking at a large-scale concept of a complete street, where you share the right-of-way for all roads and all people. So what we'd like to create is a complete neighborhood, but really a complete city. So what our approach was, is we looked at 4 different site typologies within Markham that are representative of most towns, even hamlets, and cities around Ontario and Canada. Those included a residential street, a busy intersection, a mobility hub, and a commercial street. We then identified 4 types of users within Markham, and those were kids aged 16 to 18, adults, and seniors. We decided to break up adults into 2 groups to identify 2 types of users, those that commute and make trips within the city, and those that make trips outside of the city. So we believe that complete cities must have a place for all people and all modes of transportation. And cities have the capability of providing something for everybody, only because and only when they are created by everybody. So we think that streets should be designed by kids, seniors, adults, and really everyone who lives in the community and accesses and goes through the community, not just transportation planners. So that streets can be a safe place for walking, cycling, and really all modes, and not just for cars. So the first typology we looked at was a residential street, and we chose one in a very typical cul-de-sac. It's about 15 streets built around a public school. And what you see in this particular area is fairly wide streets. There's no sidewalks. Most driveways have 4 cars in them. And there's additional street parking for the overflow. And you see no kids outside walking or biking or anything. We spoke to some local residents, and most of them, there's actually a divide. You'd think that they would have wanted sidewalks, and this is something the developer skipped. But most of them actually chose the street because there were no sidewalks, which allowed them to forego shoveling and also allowed you to park 2 more cars in your driveway. But it's systemic because their kids who go to the school 3 blocks away are now driven to school. And the parents who would have their kids walk feel a little uneasy with their kids walking with so many cars, so they now drive them as well. And now around the school, which is only 3 blocks away from this street, you have 200 cars lining up at the end of the day, and buses. So even kids who live across the road are driven because of fear of walking between cars and buses. So this is a common theme that came up and spoke to residents. And I'll have Todd walk you through our proposed solution for the street.
Good evening. So our retrofit of this street focused on a number of issues that acting together would make a kid feel like, hey, yeah, I can watch the little problem, and the kids feel, or the parents feel that the kid is safe, their kids are safe. These factors are what we focused on, but certainly not limited to reflective lines along the sidewalk, vegetated or different paver treatment buffers separating where the kids are walking to delineate and demarcate the difference. Lowering the speed limit to 40 from 50, creating lay-by parking with guards in front so that cars don't feel like it's a free-for-all along a street where there are likely kids biking or walking. And the walking school bus you see, which is a theme that really went throughout our idea of getting a community to work together for this initiative. So looking at this in plan view, we divided it into implementation stages, acknowledging the fact that uptake is likely over a period of years, contingent upon education campaign, new habits, policy planning, so that a few gregarious residents take up the call, go knock on other people's doors and say, hey, can we get a group together and meet at this stop, at this star here, and then kids can watch school together. I'm not teaching you what a walking school bus is, I'm sure you can figure it out. And it's active in a lot of different cities, but we felt that in this particular suburban development around which the whole development is around a school, that it could really work. Later, years 2 to 4, that you could start to implement speed bumps and that vegetated or paved buffer that separates and makes the place where kids or bikes are feel like it's their area and they don't need to worry about cars. And then long-term, perhaps rethinking the way the street network occurs in changing a lot of two-ways to one-way, so that there's less traffic and there's predictable traffic direction. Planting trees, obviously, and planting them well, choosing the right tree, and share bike lanes. So that was the ideas that we had for a residential street, and those situations are very typical of developments within the last 15 years that are focused on the car, but we do feel like with a lot of different implementation we could change that. So Carter will give you the existing condition for the next one.
So now I'm looking at a major intersection. This is Highway 7 Markham Road. It's a fairly large intersection. I'm sure we go through most of these daily. And the challenge here is that intersections like this one and others around it are designed for the use of the car only. So the north-south road is 6 lanes. It feeds the 407 just to the south. Although just a block to the north, you get into Old Markham, in the historical district, it goes into 2 lanes. And it crosses Highway 7, which is 8 lanes across. You have schools on the other side of the road, you have a park on the far side of the road. But really the challenge here as well is no one lives around these areas. It's not really a node that you would notice as you go down Young Street, see these big nodes of developments where you have people living and commuting and accessing shops and retailers and amenities. So what you have really is just a large intersection for cars to get through and go north, south, east, west. And what we found, speaking to people on site, was that they really wanted to sort of pedestrianize the intersection. There are increased levels of pedestrians and people wanting to bike. It is quite dangerous as you go down Highway 7. And it was having thoughts from people as we spoke to commuters and people waiting for the bus and drivers, is that they'd like to see traffic levels, like congestion times, maintained or reduced, but increased mode shares. And talk about these three strategies.
We really wanted to present our vision as scaling down the feeling of one of these intersections. I'm sure we've all tried to cross them, and sometimes it's hard to make it all the way across in the time you're given. We wanted to scale it down with a bunch of different design strategies to a human scale and a human time frame. So if we zoom in, we see that this former major intersection uses density, uses signage to the right, uses very identifiable and obvious crosswalks, the guard at the corner, which makes people feel like it's maybe their space. They've sort of taken back that part of the intersection to do what they need to do to negotiate how they're moving through it. Density right up to the street line is crucial. If you're wanting to create a place where you can create a streetscape and feel like the human scale is thought about and considered, and that it creates an opportunity for the first 50 feet, which is crucial also in feeling like It's not just about cars moving around, but there's a place for all modes of transportation. And the Viva Metrolinx, the BRT that's actually starting to unroll along Highway 7 near Bayview will eventually make its way over to this intersection, and this integrated transport hub will provide a way of having your bike, getting on BRT, going somewhere and getting off with your bike, a dedicated lane. It's really, for me and the group, felt like this has the potential to create a new suburban boulevard typology that could be really amazing. So looking at it in plan, in the first little bit, at this intersection, there's a really great recreation area just south, but there's no signage or pathway to get there, so we wanted to try to create a context by directing people to that, increase the walk times, and make obvious the crosswalks. The next phase would be the connectivity of these bike lanes, so making it very obvious and very thorough that that is a lane unto itself. And the mixed-use densities, as I said, built right to the street line. Some tree planting that echoes recreational and naturalized areas beyond, so that it feels like the area isn't cordoned off, but rather that natural systems and man-made systems, woman-made systems have a place in all of these different areas. And finally, long-term implementation with acknowledging the BRT in the future is that they have these transit islands that are very generous of space. You feel like you can negotiate what you need to do and get safely on and off. Different paving colors and textures to announce the center as an area of exchange and intersection and movement, that all different types of transportation are occurring here.
The next typology we looked at was the mobility hub. And what we chose to look at was the Mount Joy GO station. It's at the north end of Markham Road at Burr Oak. And what you see here is really a large parking lot with a station. The challenge here is really to look at how other oaks can access the site. Typically, as we said, the majority of residents who use the site, 81%, live within 3 kilometers. I think 50% of those live within 1 kilometer. We have a modal share where 2/3 actually drive to the site and park because they're encouraged to do so. It's a site that has free parking. It's a site that is bought adjacent properties. The site across the tracks and also to the south where they demolished buildings and enlarged those parking lots. So I think the parking lot number is between 3,500 and 4,000 spots. And although you think it's convenient to drive those 2 kilometers, which might take you a minute, if you stand in the farthest spot, which I did, and you walk to the platform, it's 5 minutes and 20 seconds, which to me isn't that convenient. If you had a better way to bike or walk and a place you could store your bike in a sort of storage facility with amenities. And the other telling sign which shows you how the modes are prioritized, the closest spot to that station is actually a free parking spot. It's not a zip car or a shared car or even a spot for someone who has reduced mobility. It's just a standard parking spot, and it's 6 feet from the station. And the bike parking is stuck behind that. You also have cars pouring through the station where buses are trying to get through, and people are walking through, so it's not the safest place in pouring. So the challenges here are sort of global, and it's looking at multiple programs and policies and consultation.
So quite apart from the intersection that we just saw where cars are going to be for the foreseeable future, these GO stations that are hoping to be increasingly used, and they have non-stop daily service. This is an amazing opportunity to style this into a mobility hub where people feel like all forms of mobility are accounted for and thought of and designed for. And you see that there's a dedicated bus lane so that the buses have a dedicated lane. They're not competing with cars to get 20, 50 times the amount of people into the station. So we're really deprioritizing the car. You're welcome to bring your car. We also thought about paid parking and doing parking garages. many of which are actually being built as part of new GO stations across Ontario, either as part of an existing development or in concert with mixed use. So we acknowledge that probably people drive their car to the station because they want to pick their kids up after, or they want to pick up some groceries after. You think about the life, the daily goings on. And so we imagine that these mobility hubs also become a venue for retail, pop-up shops, community events, farmers markets, so that you don't just go and get the train, but it becomes a whole mixed-use scenario. I remember living in Tokyo and how their stations are just incredible. That was the hub and the node of the community, and everything you needed was right by the train. So you see the dedicated bike lane, the bike, really cool, sexy bike storage. You don't have to leave your bike out in the winter. You can, rent space, rent a locker. It's going to be there when you get back. And then beyond and above, you see the idea of density and mixed use or live, work, retail at the bottom. Again, I talked about that first 50 feet to create that mise en scène for humans to feel that their scale is being acknowledged. So in plan view, we start by, when it's appropriate, making room for seasonal vendors so that people think, oh yeah, this is just a train station, I can actually, get something here and learn about my community or meet someone. And paid parking, that's a no-brainer. To rezone the area to include provision for this inclusionary zoning and the covered bike storage. So you see how the station is becoming surrounded by a different way of thinking about a mobility hub, that there's lots of different things happening. And friendly long-term with density at the corner of Markham Road and Burr Road, that would provide for hopefully a critical mass of users and residents that would make use of all the different provisions and activities and events, different crosswalk and junction design, a new GO station building actually to present it as a landmark in the landscape.
The last topology we looked at was the commercial street, and the one we selected is Main Street, so what you call Old Markham. It's 4 lanes. The 2 outside lanes are used as parking, and the middle 2 lanes is used as a thoroughfare. The outside lanes are free parking all day, and the middle 2 lanes are used as a thoroughfare. So although this space actually acts as a sort of an egress to Highway 7, which is a large, basically there's a lot of congestion. Although there's 4 lanes, only 2 lanes are actually used to move cars around. So the biggest thing here is redividing the space that works for all homes. It's moving that parking away from the street and putting it behind the buildings like you see in Unionville and other towns, cities. And using that additional space to widen the sidewalks for seniors and for youth, and patios and bike lanes and talking through that.
So here, the human scale is given to you by the scale of buildings and the storefronts, and so you build upon that existing context to imagine how, yes, you need it as a traffic artery at certain times of the day, but that also by rethinking parking, that you don't need free parking on the street. That's maybe 280s for these days. That we need to really think about what is this street and how many different people need to use it. So signage, definite pavement markings and wider markings for seniors that may live closer to the core and want to have an experience of walking around the core. As you see here, this is our idea of a complete street, bi-directional bike lanes, and no parking on the main street, but rather parking behind. And also signage here as well. So in plan view, you start out maybe doing a trial in the summer, just like Yonge Street did with the planters. You just see what sort of uptake, how many people use it, And that gives you a sense. You talk to the merchants and assure them that even though they won't have parking, that it's actually a misnomer, that it decreases business. On King Street in Kitchener, it's increased business. They have a new complete street design recently there. A bit further along, we only have parking 10 to 3 on Monday to Friday. We have car-free Sundays. You're just sort of trying different things and seeing how the community reacts and how it would affect policy. And then in the future, this is this elevation of the perspective I showed you, so that you have lay-by bollard parking so that a car can come along and sneak in to park, but it's not taking up a whole lane for parking, rather it's sort of in amongst the lane that it has, and that the mixed-use densities and buffers are all, as I said before, trying to affect a more human scale and make it a beautiful and inviting place that you don't think, I'm not welcome here or I can't go here, but that you don't even think twice about it. So Connor and I do believe, after months of, we're not transportation planners or engineers, but we do have a strong philosophy that these sorts of things aren't an overnight sensation, but that habits just need to be challenged and questioned and proposition new ways of thinking about getting around, and that your health shouldn't be a remedial thing, but should be a great byproduct of you going about your daily activities. Thanks.
Do we have a mic for these guys? We do. Great. Thanks for that presentation, guys. That was some great visuals and some obviously some very deep analysis. So what we're going to do now is we have our panelists here, and they're going to grill these two fine young men on their ideas. I'm going to start off just with a quick question to big picture in a sense here. What cities did you look at as examples that are doing interesting stuff with their suburbs, around hubs, around these types of examples that you guys came up with? Let's talk into it and see if it goes. Keep talking. We'll try mic number 2.
Oh.
There you
go. We looked at Portland, Oregon. We looked at Stratford, England. We looked at Washington, D.C. We looked at Kitchener recently. There isn't a long-term evaluation of that, but they did downtown complete street revitalization.
Keep talking, just keep talking.
There we go. Yeah, so we looked at, we tried to focus not just on North American, but because the phenomenon and evolution of ex-urban and suburban development is a North American-ish thing, we wanted to have precedents that were the right scale.
Right, so something like Portland they've had for 30 years, I believe, statewide, a complete streets policy that they're doing, and is that why you look at that?
Yeah, I mean, you can't help but hear about Portland all the time, and it just seems like different modes of transportation are not, it's not a remedial part of their planning, it's just as of right, like it's just the right mode for the right trip, and we try to take that philosophy and translate this idea of, we have to accommodate the bikers and the walkers and but to like, wow, this could actually be a whole new way of getting around.
All right, so I'm going to turn to the panel. Does anyone want to go first with the question? Want to jump in? Okay, Jennifer's going to be the first.
So a couple things just before the question. How many people here in the room live in the city of Toronto? Just show your hands, just so we can get a sense. So hello, Torontonians. We've got a room full of people from the city here. How many people here are somehow involved in the design industry, whether it's landscape architecture, So a few people. How many, about a third of the room maybe, how many people here consider themselves active transportation advocates? You've drunk the Kool-Aid, you're there, so maybe about half the people in the room. How many people in the room feel that we need to have a big conversation about how we move in the city of Toronto, just because we do have Torontonians? Oh good, because I'll make a little announcement at the end of the evening that I think will make you happy. The first question that I want to ask is about consultation, and it comes from the beginning of your presentation. You talked about the importance of involving everyone in creating their own streets, involving kids, involving adults, involving users, and then you gave us an example where residents chose a street precisely because it didn't have sidewalks. And I just want to, I would like to hear you comment on this contradiction, because the reality is those people chose a street that didn't in fact have active transportation. So when you talk about having a really inclusive design process, I think you're talking about maybe only involving some people, and it just raises a real tension for us that I think behooves us to think really carefully about when we talk very broadly about the merits of consultation, when we do feel that there are, well, about half the room put their hands up and said they were advocates for active transportation, when some of us in the room actually do think that a certain kind of outcome is better than another. Is that a doozy?
Well, I think that's a challenge for almost anything we have in our lives, where we have to make a decision. You see this in the States with sugar drinks on Obama. He's trying to make a decision for the masses, which will hopefully reduce heart disease and all these illnesses, which causes the taxpayer money. But there are residents who choose to live that way, and choose those drinks in that lifestyle. And I think you're already going to have that. I think that the challenge for places like Markham, let's keep it on point for, say, residential streets, and parents choose a street with no sidewalks, is I think it's a bit of, as much as the consultation is also about education, so it's educating them on the sort of pros and negatives of choosing a street with no sidewalks. There's also educating developers on offering a street with no sidewalks in the first place. I think it's a systemic thing. The people who chose the street because of no sidewalks, it was because of, I think, very selfish reasons. It's because they don't want to shovel snow. These are very able-bodied young families. And the fact they could put 2 more cars in the park, 4 cars. So I think it's challenging people, it's about education. And I think the way you get things in motion is you, rather than deal with the masses, that's quite difficult, is you deal with workers and advocacy groups. And really, if you have a thought to make, really speak up and don't just sit there.
I know in the city of Toronto, in the walking strategy, there was a specific part about making connections of those. It was like the goal was that every street that didn't have a sidewalk, at least one side of the street would eventually get a sidewalk. And then the other part was that there was a number of sidewalks that start and then abruptly end somewhere because of some weird reason that we have no idea. And so continuing that type of thing. So what probably could work in something like Markham is actually just enhancing a policy that at least you have to have a sidewalk on one side of the streets, like something along those lines.
Or you just have a give and take. You can choose no sidewalks, but you have to invest in that program.
Right.
If you don't want to bike and motor to work, then you pay a certain tax or to help fund programs that encourage those kinds of modes. I think that's important.
On the flip side of all that too is, can you imagine saying we're going to have no road for cars? Right? That seems like a bizarre notion. We're just going to have a sidewalk, and so flipping that around and showing people the kind of silliness of saying, well, we're not going to have a road, is the same reason why you don't say we're not going to have a sidewalk as well.
Yeah. Well, there's ways you can do it. If you look at our strategy for sort of renovating those existing streets, we weren't taking away from anyone's land and giving it to their property or their right.
You're taking road space.
It takes up road space. So you're working with the existing drainage. There's strategies that are easier and less costly to potentially implement, and it's a way to sort of share.
Adam.
Well, great. I found it really interesting, and I wanted to focus on 2 different areas. One of them, I wanted to sort of get your comments on the use of temporary methods. I saw your slide up where you took the residential street on one side, and then on the other one, you sort of had the bike path, or sorry, the walking have alcohol because it wasn't sort of an elevated sidewalk. And you know, it strikes me, and I was struck by this when I was walking past the Sherburne bike lane the other day, and we ripped up the entire road. We're putting down a whole new base, and yet in a lot of places they found more creative, cheaper solutions to go ahead and do these things. They also have the advantage of being able to be potentially temporary, or you can move them more incrementally. So I wanted to sort of get your sense on how you saw moving out the plan in a more temporary fashion, something that wouldn't have to do, rip up the whole road, put in a new sidewalk. That could be great, but it's incredibly expensive. I think the last couple of years, they were putting in like the equivalent of like 600 or 700 meters of sidewalk just because it's literally, it's in the city of Toronto, because it's so expensive to go in there and just lay a sidewalk if that's all you're going to do. And otherwise, you have to wait for the next rebuild of the road, which could be 30 years down the road. And you referenced that you have to wait for that. The other thing I wanted to touch on, just to give you 2 points and let you respond, is you talked a lot about building parking. In terms of the GO train station as you were looking to transform it. And that really is interesting to me because, you know, at TTC we started charging for parking. We found that there was actually no reduction in ridership. People switched to the bus to make those short trips that you made, or that you were referring to. And at the cost of $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 a spot, actually, for the same number of riders, you could literally actually build a subway at that cost for riders attracted. It's so expensive to build and maintain them. You made that decision to actually say, we're going to take, you know, flat parking on that's cheap, $6,000, $7,000 a spot, and we're going to spend, I mean, I know you didn't have specific budgets, but we're going to go ahead and spend this money, and you're right, the province is spending $150 million on parking to attract relatively few riders. So I was wondering why you chose that. And then I know your project didn't necessarily, I don't know all the parameters. I sat in on one of the groups for part of the move sessions, but in terms of not just infrastructure, but of course you have to have plans. You can build those new bus lanes, but if you don't provide local bus service to get people as maybe as an alternative to parking, it doesn't necessarily work. You have a beautiful bus lane, but it actually, you have very few buses and you still have the issue of how do people get to the station. So I was wondering if you could, those 2 points, it'd be interesting to see hear your response to those.
Sure. So on a residential street, a certain area becomes a neighborhood where people know each other, or they look at what other people do, or they take their cues from neighbors. And so at the same time that we were trying to be completely optimistic and dreamy, we also realized that we're not just going to tell people how to change. We're going to, you know, try to rethink an environment so that the cars can't just speed through, and that so they might slow down. And so when you do that sort of at grade, same grade, I think that cars think, maybe they think to slow down more because it's at the same grade, and that the road is not just all about them going through. So I think that at the same time that we try to educate as designers, we also have to, it's a push and pull with how the community reacts and responds. And I think a good point is about developers that they should have sidewalks there to begin with and wider. I'm not sure if that answered a question, but those were the ways that we thought about the residential street.
Yes, I mean, further to that, the way we kept it, I think, to your point about sidewalks being expensive, I think if you look at investing in children's futures as a bit of investment, the way that it's built right now is if we don't build sidewalks, we don't invest that money. We have kids that are 6, 7 now being driven to school every day. When they hit 16, they'll get their G1. When they get 17, they'll buy a car. And the only way that they'll get around is by buying, which puts further tax on roads, which is another expense. They might be less active in their life because they're conditioned to use a vehicle. And it's that systemic cost of not investing. And there's ways that we are fortunate to have someone from the regional planning on our team who sort of kept us on the ground and not in the sky, from building sidewalks and raising sidewalks. And You know, I think using strategies like on Sherborne, it's not a raised platform, they're building that curb so that the drainage still works, right? So they're not ripping up the sewers and.
No, I was just like, instead of they're building a curb, there's other places they do much more temporary fashions, literally sometimes putting a pole.
Well, yeah, like you can imagine for the first, you do a test case, 2 streets, and you just put in boulders, like you see on some of the bridges that we're doing. You put in 40 boulders, you can remove them in the wintertime, so if you are going to drive your kids, try for 2 years, see how it works, and then go for a long-term investment. But I think you're right, it's really about staging. It's not just about spending money, because you also need to educate as you're developing that sort of infrastructure. It can't be just, as we said in the first line, about just putting in bike lanes or sidewalks. It's sort of a sort of holistic approach to adapting the way people live.
I think Jennifer wants to jump in with a quick question there.
Yeah, well, just a quick comment that the other extreme, the building the infrastructure, and I had the same reaction as Adam, which was, that's great, it's a really low density area, you're never going to find the resources to build in a residential neighborhood in that way. It's simply not pragmatic. The other option is around policy and incentives and awareness. And in fact, you've got a lot of infrastructure there already in the existing road that is highly underutilized by the local traffic. That asphalt isn't going to wear out based on the local cars driving on it. So the infrastructure is there already. And finding ways to actually work with the community to focus on the streets as shared spaces. The street I live on, which isn't too far from here, and we put up pylons on the street so the kids can play hockey on the street. Don't tell anyone, but we do. The street becomes this shared space, and there's kind of an expectation in the neighborhood. If you're taking a shortcut through our block and you see a pylon, you're going to have to slow down and you're going to have to go around it. No one has to build any infrastructure to create that kind of culture. And I think there's an opportunity for neighborhoods to take that ownership of the infrastructure that exists, and you don't really need to build anything. You actually, it's more about public awareness. And I think we need to think in terms of those kinds of solutions in environments where there already has been a significant investment in infrastructure. Just that asphalt alone, given the density levels in those neighborhoods, is a lot of capital per house already. So I think thinking kind of out of the box in terms of how we share spaces moving forward is a real opportunity.
No, I think that's great, because you can imagine giving cul-de-sacs, sort of that center 40 feet. It's a large turning radius that's not really used. It's a smaller scale version of what you see in New York, where they're taking public plazas and really just put big sort of rocks and the large stones at the entrances to those plazas, and then change nothing. The pavement's not changed. They've got some public seating and some public streetcars, and those are now sort of replaying public spaces. And it's maybe a little more cost-effective way to approach.
Paul's up next.
Okay, thanks very much for your presentation, and I enjoyed it. But I'm going to be a bit critical, because all this stuff, they're all great ideas, but I've heard it for the last 20 years. And so my question is more in terms of what is it going to take to actually make some of this stuff happen in the transformation? I'll give you a couple of examples. If you go along Highway 7, you go up Highway 400, notwithstanding everything we know about sustainability, transit, all this great stuff, right? It's business as usual. It's subdivisions galore. It's 2, 3, 4 car families, as you said. No transit. It is big box retail. It is all auto dependent, right? So my sort of question is, I've seen official plan policies throughout this region that contain all the right words, but there's no action to make them happen. So I got a couple of thoughts here. I'll throw them out, and maybe you guys can respond. I agree. Jennifer made the comment about public discussion. We need a public conversation, and I would call it about choices and consequences. People forget there's a consequence to every choice you make, and the choice of building the way we built out there is a huge consequence, because it's very hard to readapt and refit those subdivisions. What are you going to do? Are you going to put houses in the backyards? Are you going to increase the height? Are you going to have 2 or 3 units in each house? Whatever, I don't know. But there's issues along those lines. So a public conversation about choices and consequences, I think, is essential. The second theme that I would talk about is my experience as being the former chief planner, and so happy Jennifer is the new chief planner, is that we got to make it personal. So what's it going to do, these things, for your daily life? Everybody sitting in this audience, your mothers, fathers, aunts, uncles, brothers, sisters, what's going to change in your daily life? And you have to get the people on the daily life cycle and convince them that a whole series of changes, whatever they may be, are going to improve their daily life experience through more choices, like the examples. In terms of, if you're taking that GO train, right? Now, as many people know, the GO train service is only rush hour from the burbs, except the Lakeshore line, right? And that's hourly. Well, what if you had a GO train every 15 minutes all day long? North, south, east, west, throughout the whole region. What if it was electrified? Which, when I was on the Metrolinx board, I championed electrification. But again, talk is cheap. So, those are some of the issues. And I think we need a huge transformation. And it's got to come from the people as opposed to top down. So that's the second point. The third thing I wrote down here is, in terms of, I always find it incredibly frustrating is the right word. We have great examples of good urbanism right here in Toronto. It's called the streetcar suburbs. When we know where all the streetcar routes go in Toronto, when all those subdivisions or housing developments were built, they were built with a streetcar right up front at enough density to support a viable streetcar service. I'm going to give you one figure, and Adam will relate to this. This always blows me away. The Finch Avenue bus, as an example, carries about, I think, 42,000 riders a day. The whole goddamn Shepherd subway carries 47,000 riders a day, right? If you add up all of Toronto's streetcar routes, in total, the number of people carried, it is double what the entire GTA GO system carries, and all the trains and all the buses. The power of streetcars and good bus service is incredible. So I've got all kinds of stuff here I could say, but I just want to throw those sort of notions. My real question of all this is, what's the strategy to change, to do the transformation? How are we going to do this? Because I think frankly, we're just tinkering and we're not really having any impact.
Twitter and hope. I totally agree. Our presentation was infused with hope. I agree. I'm trying to make it happen.
Yeah, I do agree with everything you say. I feel your frustration. I feel frustrated every day. I'm not just a cyclist or a walker or a driver. I use all of these things, and I don't know how to change the system. I do work with Cycle Toronto. We do a bit of advocacy, and just to get a Sharrow along Strawn Avenue, or get another crosswalk across Lakeshore, which would connect with the bike path and Margaret Trail, it takes years of traffic studies, and so I don't know how it really changes overnight. And part of it is infrastructure that either is too expensive to change, like the issue with the GO trains is that GO service shares the rails with CN, is my understanding. They're in the process of untying those lines so they can run trains during the daytime, independent of CN or CP. But until they get there, that's like 10 years away. We won't see that through the day. So it's hard for those people who work on flex hours to do it, so Obama?
Can I just add, to pick up on Paul's part, we talk a lot about look to other cities, and we sort of sometimes get really down on ourselves in Toronto. And yet when we actually look at the numbers, you can pick your favorite major, you think, wow, Paris is such an amazing metro system. Portland has an amazing bike system, and they do. And then when you look at the actual numbers, the car ownership in France, even in the greater Paris region, is not dramatically different than the GTA. Italy, and there are European examples that go far off. You look at the numbers for Portland or for major cities where a percent of bike people who are cyclists getting to work, and yes, they are higher, and sometimes it's weather, sometimes it's infrastructure, but we're not, it's not like we are so far behind. We are far behind on our infrastructure, to Paul's point, but it's not like it's pie in the sky, we'll never reach there. You look at European cities like Paris, they still have 60+% driving. Even in these cities, London is the same, even with the congestion tolls, even with these, with their great metro systems and whatnot. So I guess, going to Paul's point, yes, it's about infrastructure, but it's also about being realistic and I guess, realizing that we're not that far. It's policy oriented. Like Paris didn't put in a lot. They put in a bike share program. They put in some bike lanes, but a lot of it was about education and as much about the drivers. I mean, they said the first day was sort of chaos the first week. A year later, people were learning because there were more bikes on the roads, not necessarily a ton more bike infrastructure except the bike share program. So thinking like how the policy, so yeah, it's about infrastructure, but you talked about how do you change that hope. It's also about ways of thinking of it. And you still have to answer the parking issue for those stations.
So, do you guys want to respond to that, or do you?
Yeah, I mean, for the GO stations, a lot of it is because we also had someone from Metrolinx, I don't want to write him to say, is that Metrolinx does want a place for people to park. You will also have people, you will always have people who drive. Those who choose because they can. Those who feel they have the incomes to support that, and they don't feel bikes for less of a person. And also certain times of the year, I know, like, I don't bike all year long. I will drive certain places, and I understand not that parking structures are expensive, but it's kind of thing you work with the metrics of cost of parking, so you can pay for that over time. If you can, because if you can't, I mean, people downtown in Toronto will pay for spots on their condos for 30, 40 grand. They might be willing to pay $300 a month to park their car at a GO. I'm not saying I love to build a station like that because I don't want to. But the other thing to look at is if you build the buildings a bit like they build schools in Sweden, they know that schools, populations in areas are, when they ebb and flow, they grow and they get smaller. And there's not always just like the GTA in downtown, there's not the same amount of kids now as it will be in 15 years, say about Queen's Toronto. It'll be all hipsters and professionals. So, well,
They deserve schools too, though.
well, yeah, they have a chance. So what they do with these schools is when there's a lack of population of kids, they pre-engineer the schools to be converted to condos. So they're already roughed in for, now I know that has cost, but what you're doing is you're leveraging that capital and that investment to do something in the future. Like you see the brickworks, right? This is a great example of sort of reclaiming the space. And if you could build those structures in such a way that they could be converted later, this is something you have to completely engineer. It's one way to approach building a structure like that.
All right. Nancy's up with the next grilling.
Okay, thanks.
It's like a dragon's den of.
Yeah.
It's like offering you zero money.
So, yeah, it's hard to be last because there's so much that I want to say. I want to talk about what everybody said. But I'll start with your presentation. And one thing that that I was really pleased about was all of the talk about complete streets, because from our perspective at TCAT, that's something that we've been advocating for 3 years now, and we really feel like it's got a very it has a lot of legs in terms of, we've seen the policy movement across the U.S. There's over 350 policies developed there, and we're really trying to get that same kind of movement happening in Canada. So I'm really glad to see this kind of language being used, because I think that it really helps to depoliticize the topic. So we're kind of all in this situation together, and similarly, it's funny this idea of cyclists and pedestrians and drivers, and it's this kind of weird thing that we do in North America, which is like really not, in European cities, it's like, what is that? What are you talking about? You're a cyclist. It's like I use my bike to get to work. It's not like I identify as that. It's like this funny thing that we do that I'd love to see us kind of move beyond that. And I think that this is one way to do that, is by start to use this kind of language of complete streets. And just in terms of what Paul's saying too, I mean, I think that we do have really lots of great examples in the GTA of complete streets. And I think that the issue is really, how do we make this happen on a routine basis? So that it's not just a one-off. It's not like, when someone donates $1 million to the city, it's like, we work this out every time. It's like part of business as usual. And I think the policy is really important, so I was glad to see that you have that in there. But one thing that kind of concerned me that I wanted to mention was, there's a lot of talk, and I think everybody ahead of me kind of said something similar, like, about that it's not necessarily about bike lanes, and we don't necessarily need bike infrastructure. And from our perspective at TCAT, it's like bikes are the one mode that have been like routinely ignored and left out of the equation. And it's true it doesn't always need to be bike lanes, but I think particularly in a municipality like Markham, which actually has the second worst active transportation rate in the country, it's been developed in such a horrible way that just to try to, think about the idea of shared streets or, it's just like, it's just not a go. When you've got that kind of volume and speed of cars, I think that I just don't think that we're at that place. I mean, maybe down the road when we calm the traffic and we reduce the traffic. But I think, when we're talking about streets like we have in Markham, I think that it's, that we really need to be looking at bike lanes. So I don't know if you want to respond to that. It wasn't really a question, sorry.
I agree. I totally agree. I think the point we were trying to make is, how I interpreted that line was that it's about the right mode for the right choice, and it's about all modes, and it's about thinking about how to accommodate all the modes. And the driver was health, and that we felt that walking is an immediate capability for maybe more people than biking might be. So, of course, I didn't think that biking isn't important. I think it was an inclusivity, trying to think of how everything works together as a designer, looking at what you have and what you need and what you want. So I totally agree.
Do we have, there's one more? Both of you, quick questions because we got to wrap it up and get to, we're going to take a break.
I'm getting pressure here for the moderator.
Okay.
If I can say one last thing here, which really bugs the hell out of me. About 6 weeks ago, I wrote a big piece for the Insight Saturday section of the Star. Some of you might have read it. I basically asked the question, what if you couldn't drive? How would you conduct your daily life, right? And I went through how many people under 16 obviously don't drive. A lot of seniors don't drive. But you know what? About 35% of the population of the old city of Toronto doesn't drive. They don't even have a license, right? They never even had a license, right? And we make this assumption that everybody drives all the time. We've got to accommodate the car. Well, I think that's bullshit. That's the first point. The second thing is, I talked about in that example, in terms of Buck making it personal, right? So let me ask you, pose this question to you. What would your answer be if I said to you, how would you like $500,000 in your RRSP, 5 more years of healthy life, right? And time to do all kinds of things that you wish? Who would say yes, right? You know where I got those numbers? From the Canadian Automobile Association. Because the average cost of owning a car, a Dodge Caravan in Toronto, is $12,000 a year all in, everything. Amortization, parking, the whole deal. That's what the reality is on their website, right? If you multiply that over a 40-year working life from 25 to 65, it's $500,000 for one crappy Dodge Caravan. If you own 2 cars, you are blowing $1 million out of your pocket, right? For the purpose of having something that eventually is worth nothing, right? Just a minute. And the second thing is about time. I worked out the math. If you spend an hour a day in gridlock over a working life, that's equal to 1 entire calendar year sitting on the Queen Elizabeth Way. If it's 2 hours a day, it's 2 years. It's 3 hours, it's 3 years. Time. And the third thing is health, the focus of this topic tonight, right? We're supposed to walk 10,000 steps a day, right? Ideally, to maintain good health and all that stuff. Well, if you're sitting in gridlock, you're not walking very much. So the reality, when you add all that up, that's very personal stuff, right? So that's an important thing. The last comment I want to make, and then you can respond to this, is I call this moving minds. That's what we've got to move, as well as people in transit and all this other stuff. And ironic, when I had this article appear as a whole front page of the inside section of the Star. What was the headline on the front page of the Star? It was about the region of York, where the leaders up there, I'm not getting personal, I'm just using practical examples that were in the paper, said, well, we know sprawl is bad, but we got to keep doing it because we need the money. Like the mindset, the lack of political leadership, you know, so that's why I'm frustrated. Moving minds, educating, making it personal. So I appreciate any observations you have, because to me it's part of the strategy of trying to make this stuff happen.
Once again, I have to agree with everything you said. And
You might be yelled at if you don't.
No, I completely agree. I mean, I grew up in a household full of cars, but I had to drive because that was just thing. I grew up at 16, I had a car to drive, but I've never owned one personally, and I don't really want one. But here's an example of someone making a change, and I don't mean to do a company plug, but I am going to. The company I work for, Green Homes, we are a sustainable renovator, but we go further than that, and we try to look at reducing the amount of sort of impact we have on our total operations. So we're probably the only construction company where there's only 2 drivers. The other 13 staff take TTC and are mandated to cycle to work. And the way we do that is we make choices in taking clients, and we only take things that are accessible by TTC lines. And I know that it came up when I was looking for work. My partner looked for work, and she now commutes to Burlington, so she spends 2 hours a day on the highway. And I think you're right, it's making a choice. Do you want $500,000? And for me, I'm working, in a city where I can bike and transit, and I think it is making it personal, and trying to make a difference. I mean, it's not easy running a construction business company with no trucks, but you leverage your assets. You reduce the cost for clients. You make standard deliveries, and you're more well organized. And when you have a car, you can drive all over the place. I go into my parents' house and I drive all over the city because there's no bike lanes, and to get to my friend's house is like an hour and 20 minutes. But I think you make life choices. The reason why you live downtown is so you can take transit and bike, and I don't know how you do it in the suburbs, but it is making it personal. So maybe it's like the want ads, like, do you want to stay home, not leave your house, make $500,000, and live 5 years longer? Call this number, and I'll give you the number.
I think now I would really, or the grid would really like those kind of ads in the back of their paper. Anyways, we're gonna have to end this presentation here. We got to take a few minutes to set up for the next one, and we're gonna repeat this whole process again with another presentation. So, got a couple of minutes to mill around here. I believe there's some water in the back, and yeah, we'll be back in a few minutes.